Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to a special series of the Strength Coach Podcast, Racism in Fitness, What Can We Do Better? This is a 6-part series with the recent events, including the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and now Rayshard Brooks. I wanted to try and do something that was more than just posting a black square on social media to show that I believe that Black Lives Matter, and to help my listeners, and me actually, understand some of the black experience in fitness. These events made me look at my own actions and probably more importantly, non-action. So I'm trying to do what I can to be an anti-racist, and I'm educating myself, listening to books, watching documentaries, having conversations, and attending webinars. So I feel like I've done a horrible job including black voices on this podcast. So that's one thing that I aim to change with future shows, is having a better representation of black strength coaches on the show. So what I aim to do with this series is to just start a conversation about racism in the fitness industry with some folks from diverse positions within the profession, including high-level corporate positions, trainers, physical therapists, and strength coaches. I'm just trying to listen. I'm just trying to learn and use my platform to help people understand a little bit better. So each episode also has a sponsor that will be donating $250 to the organization of choice for that episode's guest. I will also be donating $50 each episode and would encourage you to donate as well. I'll have all the links to the organizations at ContinueFit.com in the show notes for each episode. So today I have on Dr. Jennifer Hutton. She's a pediatric physical therapist whose webinar, Anti-Racism and Allyship for Rehab and Movement Professionals, I recently attended. You can actually still get a copy of that, and we'll have a link in the show notes at ContinueFit.com. We're also going to talk about some of the things that she talked about in the webinar, and that includes allyship and more on the show as well. So the organization that she has chosen is the National Association of Black Physical Therapists. And today's sponsor is Train Heroic. So thanks so much for your generous donation. All right, well, lots of things to get to. So let's get on the phone with Dr. Hutton. All right, today's guest is Dr. Jennifer Hutton, and she has endured, this is from her bio, I love this, endured countless tears, being peed on, kicked in the face by a prosthetic leg, run over by a wheelchair, shins rammed by a gait trainer, stabbed with a loft strand crutch, I don't even know what that is, preteen attitudes, questioning what the heck is on her pants at the end of the day, and a few no, I don't want to's, maybe even a temper tantrum or 10. Sounds like a fun day in her world. She's a pediatric physical therapist practicing over 10 years. She has a passion for helping build up strong children, no matter what their level of ability. And I really found out about her through her webinar that I watched the other night. Now you can watch, and we're going to have links to that. It's called Anti-Racism and Allyship for Rehab and Movement Professionals. Jennifer, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me on. That's probably the best intro I've ever heard.
All right, cool. I got that going for me. Well, I do want to mention, everybody, today, each episode, we get a sponsor to donate $250 to the organization of the guest choice, and I will also be donating $50 to help encourage other people to donate as well. So Jen has chosen, like she did with the webinar, the National Association of Black Physical Therapists. We're going to talk about that later, but thank you to Train Heroic for that donation. So, Jen, I want to start out. I've been listening to a lot of Ibram Kendi, and I saw an interview with him with Oprah, and she asked him how he was doing, and he said he's both enraged and energized right now. Enraged because he's a human being, a black human being, and people are dead because of the color of their skin. But he's also alive, being fueled by the resistance, declaring that Black Lives Matter, and seeking to push for transformative policy change so that Black lives can be protected. And I know you're a leader, you're an educator. Your job is very stressful as it is already. There's been so much going on, whether it's Armand Arbery, Breonna Taylor, the Central Park, Amy Cooper calling the cops on a gentleman who asked her just to put her dog on her leash. And then we have obviously George Floyd that came up in all these protests. And again, you've had this webinar and you're doing all these things. And sometimes people don't ask people in your position and leaders like, hey, Jennifer, how are you doing? So I just want to ask, how are you right now? It's so stressful, but there's so many good things going on as well with this. Talk to us about that.
I honestly, I probably took about 4 or 5 days away from social media, away from everything when it first started. And I said it in the webinar, but it's very difficult to heal from trauma in the presence of your oppressor or a symbol of your oppressor. So I kind of just had to dial it back. But to be honest, I have been blessed with allies my entire life, ones that have reached out with every tragedy that has happened in our community. And so that just makes me feel loved, one, and it energizes me to keep going because they know that this is something that I'm very passionate about. Right now, I'm tired because it's been a long week with the webinar and I taught and everything else. But I am energized. I am empowered, and not just by the amount of people that have showed up saying, I want to be allies, but also watching our younger generation. I mean, to watch them organize protests, to watch them march in the streets, and I'm talking high schoolers and college students, to see that they understand and they get that this is their fight, that they want to be a part of it. That just lets me know that this is not going to end with an older generation.
Absolutely. I was talking to my buddy Kelvin Gary. He's on this too in the next episode. And he has a gym on 14th Street in Manhattan. And basically he went out during a protest that people were marching on 14th Street. And it was so incredible. He posted it on Instagram, and it's so powerful, and it's so loud, and the chants. And I didn't even notice this, but he told me, he said, I started to well up because I looked at all these people marching, and he might have seen 2 or 3 African Americans. Everybody else it was all. And so it made him feel so good about that.
Yes, I the very first protest we had in Nashville, I pulled up and I actually thought, I was like, am I at the wrong spot? Because there were no Black people. It was literally all white people and other people of color with their signs saying Black Lives Matter. And I mean, I was overwhelmed because I've been to protests since this has at least since it's begun for me, since we started to see it, since Trayvon Martin really sparked everything. Mm-hmm. And that has never been the case. It's always been smaller numbers. They've shown up, but just in small numbers. And this was overwhelmingly majority. And the fact that we've been asking for their voice in this fight, knowing that we can't change it ourselves and actually seeing them respond, it's amazing.
Absolutely. But I wasn't going to ask this, but I didn't even think of this, but I want you to go over this really quick about racial trauma and the question of how you are doing, and just warn people sometimes, because like you said, it can be hard. You don't always want to be answering that question, so people don't be offended if you don't maybe get that answer. Can you, because you talked about that in your webinar, and I want you to go over that.
So racial trauma is very similar to PTSD. The only difference is the event is still going on. You're still in those toxic environments and you can't necessarily remove yourself from it. And this is where you start to see the feelings of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideations, the physical aspect of it that most of us are actually dealing with it. And then that weathering, the fact that your body just gets worn down from that high level of stress. I think James Baldwin's quote, I may not say it correctly, but he basically says to be a Negro in this country is to be in a constant state of rage. And to have to manage that level of rage for what you're experiencing and what you're seeing other experience and still function in society, that can take a toll on you. So you definitely have to find your areas of respite. You have to take your self-care a lot more seriously because it is detrimental to your health.
You talked about in anti-racism, your webinar, anti-racism and allyship for rehab and movement professionals. One way to somebody can heal. There's a lot of ways that you gave examples of is to kind of tell some stories. So, did you want to share, like, again, this is the Strength Coach podcast, and so we do get fitness professionals listening to it. So, and I wanted to kind of lean this for the most part towards the fitness industry. For the most part, do you have any stories about encountering racism in the industry?
I definitely have a few, and it's funny because I think just as a professional, a movement professional, but I also remember as a child those times in my fitness journey where I felt it. And one of them was being a swimmer on a swim team, and being my brother and I were the only Black kids that swam on the swim team. And I had a couple of incidences with people on my team where I was either left out of parties or not invited, or invited but left to the side and they really didn't want to interact, where I felt out of place. And so it definitely changed my desire to even want to participate in a sport that I absolutely loved. Swimming was my absolute favorite. But the environment that I was in was toxic for me, and it made me question myself at a young age. So it was something that I actually tried to shy away from. And then, you fast forward to when you're an actual professional. I think I told the story on the webinar about going to get a guy in the nursing home for physical therapy. And he told me that it was against the law for Black people to do physical therapy on white people. And in the Jim Crow era, before the Jim Crow era, it actually was. Like, he was correct in his thinking. His mindset was just all the way back there in the 20s and 30s. So he was right, but it hit me. I was like, this is literally something that people are still walking around and considering, that we are not supposed to be in the same space. And it definitely made me think, how am I going to be perceived when I go into the professional space? Because in my last clinic, I was the only Black therapist that worked there. So I had some parents where I could tell they were not necessarily excited to see me come and get them. Now, I, of course, had at this point had worked on how I was going to win people over. So I never kept the issue, but it was always that thought in the back of my head of, are they going to want me to treat their child? And if they don't, how is that going to affect me? And then you go to, I'm an instructor for rock tape. There are several times when I go into courses and my coordinator is white. And when they come and ask, the AV team comes and asks for something, or they ask if the core class needs anything, they ask the coordinator. They don't ask me. Or people come in and they speak to the coordinator and ask the coordinator questions, and she or he will have to say, you should probably ask the instructor, who they've walked completely past. So you're always dealing with it in some way. It just looks different depending on the setting that I'm in.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people like me who have a platform like the Strength Coach podcast. And I was telling you, one of the self-awareness, and we're going to talk about allyship and the stages, but one of for me was the self-awareness of, wow, I've done really bad job of not having enough Black voices on here. But then I'll get in a defensive mode in terms of, well, we talked about this, like I'll want to make my life easier. So I'm like, well, if people wrote more articles and I knew that they were out there, but they're not always in my bubble either. But we do have to remember too that some of these folks are going to feel, they're going to have insecurities. Like you said, they're going to question, do I belong? And they might be afraid to put themselves out there. That's another thing. So we have to approach it in a way that makes people feel comfortable, and that let them know that they can do this. So it's one of the things that I've been thinking about as I move forward and on this journey.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There are some people that it's insecure. I think sometimes it's just knowing that you might be perceived. Because I talked on another podcast actually last week about the stages of grief and how every time you go through a racial event, you go through those stages, the acceptance that it happened, but the decision that I'm not going to accept that this is okay. The decision to say to myself, I am valuable. My voice is valuable. What I have to say is valuable. And whether somebody is ready to listen to me or not, or thinks that I'm ready or not, I'm just going to keep talking. And so I think that's definitely the approach that I've taken. And so when all of this happened, it was like, this is everything that I've been saying. It's just time to put it in a physical format so people can see it.
Yeah, and I was talking to my friend Geraldine Cooper-Smith as well about the female representation at conferences, and I was asking her thoughts on it because she works with Perform Better, and they've tried to get more female voices there. And I was talking to her about some people that were boycotting the company to, because they don't have enough female voices. And she said, yeah, but if I do that, then that's one less speaker is, that's on there, and it's one less female in the audience. And I want to go there. I want to keep speaking. I want to fight for this stuff. So, you got to kind of keep yourself in the game there too, to kind of keep pushing.
Yeah, and by saying that, she's basically saying, I want to be an ally. And the only way that you can be an ally is to leverage your privilege.
Excellent. Well, that's a great segue into allyship, because I'd really never heard of that, to be honest with you. And can you talk about what allyship is, and we'll go over the stages after that.
Yeah, so an ally is basically someone who is associated with, it usually is some type of subgroup or a minority, and they're there to champion their cause. In this aspect, that means that it's usually a non-person of color who is choosing to say, hey, I see everything that's happening in all of these different systems, and not only do I think it's wrong, I want to actually be a voice with you and for you in all of these spaces. That means whether I'm next to you in the protest or I'm actually fighting your fight in the boardroom, I want to be an ally for you. And I think we're looking at it from this perspective of color right now. But I mentioned before, I am an ally to my kids with special needs. I don't know what it's like to have special needs. I don't know what it's like to have a disability, but I see everything that you go through in your life. I hear the complaints. I hear the frustrations. And so that, as an ally to them, I have to say, okay, what can I do to actually make their lives better? Doesn't benefit me, but it's really for them. I want them to have a great life. So allies, it can look different depending on the setting.
Absolutely. Well, let's go over, and again, I want to encourage people to, we'll have a link to Dr. Hutton's webinar, Anti-Racism and Allyship for Rehab and Movement Professionals, but I definitely want you to go just give overviews of each stage, which is awareness, education, self-interrogation / assessment, and action. So give us an overview of awareness.
So the first stage, when you actually awaken, I like to say, is when you actually see that something is going on, and you acknowledge that something is wrong, and now you're going to decide to take action. And part of that action is educating yourself as best you can on where all of these things come from. That means listening to Black voices, listening to voices of people of color, looking at the systems and saying, okay, how do we operate? What are our beliefs? Can people tell what our beliefs are? And then once you start to educate yourself, you process it and you start to ask yourself questions. And that's when you get into your self-interrogation and assessment. And I kind of split it up in the webinar because I truly believe that if you don't do the work for yourself, it will show up as inauthentic in your professional space. Because a lot of people say, well, what are the steps that I can do? No, don't just go ask about a person of color to come and be on your team or work in your space. You actually need to see where inside of you have implicit bias or race-based thoughts, and work on that first, because then your action, which is the last step, will actually be seen as authentic. And you're going to make mistakes in the action. You're going to make mistakes in the self-interrogation. You're going to make mistakes in education. But you have to decide that you're going to take that in as constructive criticism so that your next action will serve someone better.
Yeah, and I think when I was looking at these and at first I was like, cool, awareness. I'm feeling good. Like I'm doing these things. I understand. I'm acknowledging the white privilege and really defining, seeing that definition and understanding that and being like, yeah, I've had it so much easier, et cetera. I get it. The education piece, been, listening to a lot of books, been watching a lot of stuff, been reading things. Great. That, to be honest with you, that's the easy part. But then you get to the self-interrogation and you really have to, like, one of the questions was, are you leveraging your white privilege in the professional space? And then I was thinking, well, no, I'm not really. How am I doing that? And then I thought, wait a minute, yes, I am, because it's easy for me to get into these conferences, or it's easy. People will take my phone call or they'll do these things or if I can walk in there, it's not like you said, they're not going to walk by me. They're going to look at me like I am the presenter, et cetera. So, it's an important piece, and then it'll knock you down a little bit, but you can't let that get you down, and you just have to kind of take some of your ego aside. And that's my experience from like your things a little bit, from your steps. Like, gotta take it aside and take away your you might get your feelings hurt for a minute, and then realize, yeah, this is right. Because even when you were talking about looking at, it could be hurt. It could be not hurt. I guess hurtful might not be the word, but hard to think about your family. Like, look, I grew up in a racist family. I'll admit it. You have to admit that to yourself too, and you have to overcome it. You can't use that as an excuse.
Yeah, I the one part I usually say for people who struggle with that, because of course I don't understand what it's like to have a racist family members, but I understand how deep this is, which is why I started off the webinar with the history. Because even though you're looking at your parents or your family members or your friends and saying, oh, I think that they are racist, you also have to think about the thought viruses that existed, that they grew up with, that were hammered into their head. You cannot grow up in a space that has for colors only, for whites only, and it not affect you. So I don't always, sometimes I'm like, don't take it as a personal attack, or that this person is a bad person. It's just their thought viruses are not helpful for anyone. So that helps you for me, it takes away some of the emotion of judging the person.
And I think what I resonated me in Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist was he does a great job with the structure of the book in terms of, hey, this is what a racist would say, this is what an assimilationist would say, and this is what an anti-racist would say. And then you start to see like the difference between those things. And then I started to see, wow, that I have a lot of assimilationist ideas. And what I loved about him was he would say, here's how he was saying, here's how I had racist thoughts. So he's in the journey with you. That's what I really liked about it too. So
that's awesome.
What I also liked about, and I want to get your thoughts on this, you said, you talk about immediate action, protesting, signing petitions, sending emails, posting information about protesting, speaking up against racist remarks, looking closely at who you were voting on all different levels, maybe posting stuff on social media. And one of the things I really liked what you said is like, look, relax. You don't need to do all of these right away. Yeah. And I think there's this pressure for some people I've seen on social media. For example, I'm trying to help people get their gyms open right now in New York. Our gyms aren't open. And some people were saying, I wish some of these white gym owners would be just as concerned with what's going on with Black Lives Matter than just getting their gym open. And first of all, I feel like I'm capable of doing both, number one. But second of all, just because I don't put it on social media, everything I'm doing, I didn't tell anybody I'm doing this yet. You know, I'm doing the interviews and it's coming out. Like, I don't need to advertise that I'm doing this right now. I will once I get it done because I want people to listen. But I think there's this element of this pressure, not and by the way, it's really not from the Black community. It's more from people saying, like, oh, where are you right now? But I did love that your thoughts on the, you gave all these action steps, but it's like, hey man, it's going to take some time and we're not going anywhere. Let's just start with your first step.
Yeah, it was definitely almost manic the way that it blew up in the beginning, and it overwhelmed me because while I was happy, I was like, okay, now we know what this era looks like with trends and bandwagons, and I want this to be real. If you're going to be an ally, I need you to understand it's not just about a black box. But I think we are in a social media era. And if you have a brand, that's usually what we're looking at. If you have a brand, what do you stand for? And I think I said this in one part is you have to decide how you're going to show what you stand for. And you cannot be pressured by anyone else in this journey. I accept action. I want to see what it's going to look like. I want you to show me. I don't want to just see a black box. That's cool, but I don't want to just see one. So I wanted to stress that because I noticed not from our community, but from other communities, people saying, you didn't post and I'm unfollowing this person and this and the other. And I'm like, yeah, that's great, but that's really not going to get us anywhere, because if you shame someone into action, it will never be authentic. They will always be acting. So that's why I chose to do the webinar of, all right, let's just slow down. Let's start at the beginning and let's really look at this process so that we can understand we have to reserve our energy, do the work, but don't try to do it all in 1 or 2 weeks. This is going to take you a while. Like we said before we got on here, it's layered. There are so many layers to this.
Yeah, thanks for saying that too. It makes me feel better because we didn't get pressured because, my partner, Mike Boyle, we talked about this. I said, Mike, what can we do? Here's what I think would be great. Let's get some people on. Let me do a series, not just a Zoom call with all 6 of them on. Let me do separate episodes and let's try to do some things. But look, today's June 12th or something, 13th. I think it's the 12th. And so it's still, George Floyd only died a couple weeks ago. I mean, also you're asking me to get educated, not you. You're like, I'm trying to get educated. It's going to take me time to watch some of these things and listen and process, because each thing I listen to, for example, okay, I didn't know what redlining was, so now I'm Googling redlining, and then I'm Googling exactly what Jim Crow stuff, what that meant. And then, so you're going down these rabbit holes, and it takes time. And so it's only, look, give me some time to think about it, to learn about it, to get my response out there. Yeah, and this is what we're doing. Just because we haven't posted on social media, specifically our policy, through our social media, but I'm trying to take action on this.
Yeah, and that is part of the fact. If you're doing it from a self. A position of self and saying, let me look at what I actually am, how I'm operating, what my thoughts are, then your next steps into your business, it will seep through into that.
Yes. Well, this is also, speaking of action, can you talk about tokenism? Because again, I told you I was concerned that, I don't want it to look like that, but I think I have your answer, and that's going to be by being, if you're authentic, it's not going to look like that anyway. So, but can you just talk to us about what tokenism is and how we overcome that as well? Yeah,
so that's usually when you decide to choose one person to represent an entire subgroup. So you have a panel, or you have some type of a conference, and you make sure that you have one Black speaker, or you have a clinic and you make sure that you have one person of, Latino descent that is working there. And you feel like you've done your job in being diverse. So that's just picking that one person to represent everyone. And that isn't authentic. And we see that. We see when the same person is chosen to speak at different organizations for different conferences. We see what the mastermind groups look like. We see now what these virtual conferences look like. And we know when there's just one person, okay, we really didn't try hard. It was one question you asked in a list that you gave me was, has policy ever held me back? And to me, it's the lack of policy. It's the lack of awareness that keeps people from being able to see past their own bubble and say, hey, there are other voices out there. And not just that they're Black voices or that they are, of other races, but I actually like their information. I like their thought process. I align with their business. Because when you start to look at it that way, then you kind of do say, well, it really doesn't matter that I chose 4 Black people because I like all of these 4 Black people's work. So I think, like I said, the authentic part literally will help you take away that tokenism mindset.
I love that answer about lack of policy, because I'll be honest with that question. If you could tell, I was listening to How to Be an Anti-Racist, because it's policy. So I was like, all right, well, that could be a good question, but it really is a hard one, because sometimes you don't see it right away, but then again, that lack of policy is really where you could see the problem.
Yeah, I think the hard part is we're starting from the justice system, because that's where it's so evident that there are issues and that there is white supremacy woven throughout it. But once you look into your own spaces, then you see how subtle it can be. And that's what allows you to say, oh, so we operate differently in policy, or we don't have policy and procedures for this. So then we would miss it if it came into our faces, because we wouldn't know what to do with it.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about the fitness industry. I loved what you were talking about with examining your setting. And one thing, because what do I go right to? It's like, okay, staff, right? But you were talking about trends, visitation versus signing up, or who shows up for free classes or promotion. Can you expand a little bit on how fitness professionals can examine their setting?
Yeah, and I remember saying this definitely will take more work. But when you have different promotions, when you have, some people have Groupons, and there's, mind, body, and health. I think there's a lot of different apps where they will run free classes and promotions for introduction. But then I'm saying, okay, look at the spread of diversity that actually comes in and who actually wants to stay. And that wasn't really just speaking to money wise, like how much do your classes cost, but how did they feel when they walked into your environment? Because that's why I say doing the work will seep through and be authentic. It doesn't matter if it's an all-white gym, if I walk in there and I know that they've done the work and I feel comfortable. Because let's be real, there are some cities and places where it is majority white and your gym may be in a majority white space. But how does a person of color feel when they walk in? Do they feel welcome? Do they feel like you see them? Do they feel like you see them through how they operate, not just through how you operate? So that's what I was talking about when I was talking about trends. Even in your signing up, who stays when that contract is up? Who says, no, I think I'm good? I think CrossFit is going to take a hit with everything that's been going on because of what's been going on with Glassman. And it was actually, not say perfect timing for that, but it happened right when I was done with this webinar. And I was like, this is what I'm talking about. The gyms that actually stand up and say, we don't believe in this and we're taking our steps. And it doesn't mean writing them off, but taking our steps to be better. That shows that you're examining and you actually want to do the work.
Yeah, a lot of boxes ended their affiliation right away. Big number of them as well. So
yeah, I saw that, and I was kind of waiting to see what was going to happen at the top for them, and I think it's still kind of unfolding.
Yeah, I think so too. Interesting. Jen, let's talk a little bit about, before I let you do some closing thoughts. Today, the donation from Train Heroic will go to the National Association of Black Physical Therapists. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so they're a nonprofit organization, and their goal is basically to just increase There are opportunities for Africans and African Americans and those from the African diaspora, as they say, for their opportunities in physical therapy. So that's they have a lot of scholarships, they have programs, they have career development, they have mentorship available, and they're really trying to help with cultural competency and our presence in the profession.
Love it. So again, thanks to Train Heroic for donating $250. I will be donating as well. And we will have links on my site for the show as well, so you can find out more about that. So, Doc, I just want to let you do some closing thoughts right now.
I would want to say, if you have decided to go on your allyship journey, I'm grateful for that, and I want you to dig deep into your own work and dig deep into the origin of where everything has sprung, which would be the history of this country, because it will allow you to be able to identify things a lot better. Be patient with yourself, do the work, do not overwhelm yourself, and be ready to be uncomfortable.
I will definitely say be ready to be uncomfortable. I will agree with that. So excellent. So I want to remind everybody, Anti-Racism and Allyship for Rehab and Movement Professionals must-see webinar from Dr. Hutton that you can still go on. We'll have a link for that as well. And also part of the proceeds go to the National Association of Black Physical Therapists as well. So Dr. Hutton, thank you so much for coming on and making me uncomfortable.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's going to do it for part 2 of Racism in Fitness. What can we do better? A 6-part series. Thanks so much to Dr. Hutton J-Pop for coming on and giving us her perspective and experience on racism in the fitness industry and allyship. Thanks to Train Heroic for their generous donation to Dr. Hutton's organization of choice, the National Association of Black Physical Therapists. I will have links at continuefit.com to find out more and to donate yourself. Next episode, I continue the conversation with Kendall Green, a strength coach and entrepreneur. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you will join me next time.